My name is Kat Pearson and I'm a PhD student in the Department of Film and Television. My research looks at UK cities of culture in television, and one of the things I'm particularly interested in is the role of the TV archive in terms of memories of place and placemaking. My research looks at the first two UK cities of culture, which were Derry in 2013 and Hull in 2017, but is centred on Coventry's year, which began in May 2021. My research is also shaped by the fact that it is a collaborative doctoral award, co-supervised by Professor Helen Wheatley from the University of Warwick, the Media Archive for Central England, or MACE, and Professor John Wyver from Illuminations Production Company. I'm going to briefly talk to you today about 3 examples of the public engagement aspects of my research, before reflecting on the impact of these on my thesis, but also on my own participation in Coventry's City of Culture Year. The first project I'd like to tell you about is an event which took place in October last year called Foleshill Screenings. Working with colleagues at Mace, I curated a series of archival films from Mace's collection which were about Foleshill and about food and growing projects in Coventry. These were screened at the Foleshill Community Centre, where local people as well as staff and volunteers were invited to come along to have some food and to watch the films before discussing their responses to seeing familiar places and in some cases familiar people on screen. The planning for this screening originally began before the pandemic, so we had to adapt to a smaller audience and shorter session, but the event still managed to provide a really interesting opportunity for people to reflect on seeing hyper-local television archives shown in the area that they were originally filmed. A number of the attendees talked about the pleasing experience of being able to recognise aspects of Foleshill and to compare the archive footage to the present-day locations. The discussions afterwards naturally focused on individual reminiscences and on the sharing of memories amongst attendees, and these were often sparked by the films rather than being directly linked to what they had seen. After the event, I circulated questionnaires which, among other things, specifically asked people about their engagement with the archives. After spending so much of lockdown by myself, thinking about how television represents place, and engaging with Mace's collections online, it was really significant to be able to hear other people's responses to the archives. When asked, has this event changed your opinion on the value and importance of television archives and screenings, and if so, how? One person responded, I think it's made me realise that it's important to show the archive films and not just store them. This is something that's integral to the work that Mace do, and it's also really important to my work about the archives in cities of culture and television programmes, and so hearing it articulated by other people was really useful. The second project I'll talk about is my involvement in the making of the BBC4 documentary Coventry Cathedral Building for a New Britain, which was broadcast at the start of June. This film, as described on iPlayer, tells the story of Coventry Cathedral and the times in which it was built, using a wealth of rarely seen archive film together with voices from yesterday and today. Over a year before this film was screened, I helped to document some of the archival footage. This included trying to identify key moments about the history of the cathedral, but also key moments in relation to the original footage. While my involvement was small, it was so interesting to witness the process of hours and hours of archival footage being put together into a 1 hour 15-minute programme. On a personal level, there are a few segments of footage that I really loved that really stood out to me when I was doing my research, and therefore that I noticed as absent in the final film, one of which, from an act of faith, showed a man testing the pitch of the organ pipes by blowing into them. However, my main response was awe that John and his colleagues at Illuminations had brought together so much footage, spanning over 20 years, to create not only a coherent narrative, but also a visually beautiful film. It should probably be noted at this point that my love of Coventry Cathedral as a building, as well as my excitement about working on this project, mean that I'm completely biased about the final film, and this is something I'm going to have to reflect upon when writing about it in my thesis. The third and final project I'll briefly touch on is a short film reel of archives, again from Mace's collection, about Coventry's architecture and public art. These will form part of the Metropolis exhibition, which will hopefully open in the city centre in July. Again, this has been a process of collaboration with the exhibition designers and curators, and with Mace. And this engagement with different cultural and civic organisations during the City of Culture Year is very useful for my research. I'm excited to see the film in the gallery space and to see how people engage with it, alongside other representations of the history of Coventry's built heritage. That was a very whistle-stop tour through some of the archival work I've done in the city over the last year and a half, but I thought I'd finish with some reflections on how these experiences will shape on my research practice going forward. One of the main things I'll take away from both Foleshill screenings and Coventry Cathedral Building for a New Britain is the huge appetite of people to see all aspects of the history of their city depicted on screen. For example, everyone who filled in the feedback form in Foleshill said they would like to attend an event like this again, and over half said that could be as often as once a month. This level of enthusiasm and excitement from people who don't work with or study archives on a day-to-day basis was hugely encouraging for me. Something that will inform my future public engagement work is the idea of not assuming what type of archives people want to see or what elements of the archives that they are shown will be of interest to them. For example, in the Foleshill screening, some of the discussions touched on what was missing from these archival films. This was either in terms of communities who weren't represented or parts of Coventry's history that people would like to have seen more of. Noting these absences in the post-screening discussion allowed us to talk about what Mace has in their archives and why. Specifically, that Mace's archives contain a large amount of local news coverage from ATV, and so the historic agenda of news companies to some extent shapes the available footage. It has also enabled me to think about the types of screenings I would like to do during the City of Culture year to address topics on subject matters that are potentially more difficult or challenging for audiences, such as those around migration and race relations in Coventry. Building on this, when writing about television and television audiences, public engagement has helped me to remember that Coventry, and the UK City of Culture events specifically, should not be seen as monolithic entities which everyone engages with equally. The narrative of the City of Culture can often be about everyone pulling together and contributing, and events are often framed in terms of mass public participation and mass public satisfaction. Engaging with communities in Coventry, both in person and online, has made me acutely aware that cities are composed of many voices and narratives, and that this should be reflected in the evaluation. On a personal level, being able to watch something linked to my PhD on BBC4 with my parents and my friends was a real privilege. Talking about this programming with them and talking about my work with the attendees at Foleshill Community Centre reminded me of the difficulties, but also of the importance of being able to explain my research to those outside academia. I believe that this is particularly important when studying something like the City of Culture, which is so embedded in the life of a city. It was also very interesting for me to monitor the responses on social media and in the press, many of which mirrored my own excitement of viewing some of these archives. This communal experience of viewing and reacting to rarely seen archive television isn't a common one, and it made me see the archives which I'd become so familiar with in a new light. Finally, as I mentioned above, all of this has made me reflect upon my own role within this research. In relation to Coventry City of Culture, I am simultaneously a producer of events, a participant, and a researcher. I believe that this is an asset rather than a limitation, but I am very aware of the importance of considering and articulating this within my thesis. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you'll have an opportunity to view some of these films that I've talked about over the rest of Coventry City of Culture year.